All right, here for the NQ80 Daily with Wayne. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm glad you remembered my name because that's not what you've put it down there, which I've noticed
Yeah,
you've
well, I
left
was
on.
testing a new feature. Yeah.
Yeah,
It doesn't appear on the recording, but when we log into this recording platform, your name is displayed, and they've just added a feature where the host can change the name. So I've corrected Wayne's name to be much more accurate.
right. But it does show up on the YouTube feed, right?
No.
So it's still going to be my name. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see about that.
I add that. Yeah. So.
Well, we'll leave the listeners and viewers in suspense then, because yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah. No, it's not. Bald is best, or something like that.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about a piece by Adam Crafton in The Athletic, who's always extremely well sourced, about plans, or I don't know whether plans is the right way of putting it, discussions about seeking naming rights for Old Trafford and or a potential new stadium, and also putting ticket prices up, like not for the season to come because that's kind of locked in, but for future seasons. The new INEOS team are looking for ways to raise revenue. Obviously, United have slipped somewhat. The revenue's been flat for quite a few years. In fact, it goes up and down depending on whether the club's in the Champions League or not. And obviously, it will go down next season. So looking for ways to increase revenue and reduce costs in a number of ways. So, yeah, initial reaction to this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's one of those things that we expected would be coming. Talk about the cutting costs first, rather than talk about the big subject of Old Trafford and the naming things. The other kind of things like the I guess short term cost cutting measures. Every new owner of any kind of business is going to go through that kind of procedure, and that's what we've been seeing with United. I mean, I'm not too sure. I mean, the thing is, a football club, but especially United, the level of revenue is dictated by how successful they are, right? You know, the more successful United are, the much more money that they make. And they're still, without that success, they're still a hugely not profitable, that's the wrong word, but they're one of the few great footballing institutions who can operate without needing to chase money or anything like that. So it's a little bit peculiar on the grander scale of everyone knowing everything that we do about Manchester United, and Ratcliffe can't be he's not going to be oblivious to United's financial sort of flex historically. So those kind of things you should know about in terms of the wider footballing landscape. So we know all those kind of things. So it kind of where it feels like they're cutting costs for smaller issues for like short-term game doesn't seem befitting of a club like United. We shouldn't be doing that for short-term measure, because obviously we all know where the major problem is. And also it does suggest or it indicates, it leaves this impression that the problems are elsewhere. Don't get me wrong, you know, like things can do with modernizing. That's the case everywhere, right? I mean, not everywhere all the time, but you are always going to have trends where some things accelerate, and you are either leading that trend or you're following it. And then you set your own trend, blah, 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 blah. That's the same kind of thing that's happened in business and in sports since time began. Now, to point the finger at United anywhere other than the sort of ownership and the mismanagement of the football team is a bit unfair, because I don't think that United are, you know, like they're miles behind. It's just some massive structural issues that have been played out for all to see for 10 years. And those kind of cost-cutting things don't really, they don't really sound great. But the Old Trafford thing's a different thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a second. But yeah.
Well, the cost cutting is marginal, right? So losing some backroom staff on the non-playing side probably United's bill. It's a bit hard to say because it's not actually separated out, playing versus non-playing, talent versus non-talent. That's not the right way of thinking about it, but it's probably about 50 million a year for the 900 staff that are not part of the playing squad. So there are some costs to be made, but it's cost savings to be made, but it's marginal, right? You need those staff to run the operations, keep the lights on, do the accounting, do the HR, do the strategy and marketing, and sell sponsorships and all of that kind of stuff, right? So there's marginal stuff there. On the revenue generation side, I mean, ticket price rises, even if it was, say, a pretty steep hike, like 10 or 15 or 20%, it's going to add, 10 million? United's gate receipts about 130, 140 million a year, something like that. So it's fairly marginal again.
Yeah.
Naming rights might be a bit better, but it really depends.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think there is a good example of an existing stadium that has been sponsored at a massive amount. Now, Spotify sponsored the Nou Camp, but that was part of a larger sponsorship deal. So it's front of shirt plus Nou Camp. So it's a little hard to separate them out. But if you ask the Spotify team, I think they would add a value probably 8 to 10 times more on the front of shirt than they would on the naming rights, because everyone will call that Camp Nou forever. And the same would be true of Old Trafford if it's a refurb and it's sponsored. If it's a brand new stadium, that's a bit different. But even then, like if you look at, I was looking it up this morning, what's the highest naming rights deal in sports anywhere in the planet? And it looks like it's SoFi's deal for the SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, brand new stadium. And that was $625 million over 20 years, which works out at just a tad under £25 million a year. Now, could United do that kind of deal? You know, a bigger brand than the LA Rams or whatever? I mean, yeah, probably. The Emirates is nowhere near that. I think it's more at 10 or 12 or something like that a season. So United probably could do 25 million a year. Yeah. Again, set against 700 million pounds of revenue, it feels marginal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now it is almost pure profit. There's not a lot of cost associated with actioning that sponsorship deal. So there's a lot of profit there, and it could pay for a third of the stadium or something like that over the next 20 years, maybe. But I think it would have to be a new stadium to be of that kind of value. And then it would, if INEOS were the partner, let's just say, and they were more generous. Ratcliffe found an extra 20 million down the back of his sofa because, when you're as rich as he is, you probably just lose that on the daily. That it would go through the Premier League's fair value test. Now, I think United would be in a good position to say, hey, we're one of the, let's say, top 3 clubs on the planet with the top 3 global reach. We should therefore have one of the biggest deals. I don't know. It's all little bits, though. I mean, maybe if they can find 5 of these things.
Yeah.
They cut some costs. They find some naming rights. They find a new partner to sponsor the cliff or something. They sell off assets. I don't know. Maybe like added together, it's something meaningful. Maybe.
Yeah, I think the United, like you say, the top 3 soccer brand. So their capability to, in an hypothetical situation, like let's say that was all going to happen, their capability to put an exponential increase on whatever we're talking, whatever figure you're talking about, to make it look crazy high, they still have a greater capability to do that because of the fact of who they are. So the problem that we've got, using Manchester City and Arsenal as an example, Arsenal a little bit different because you couldn't argue isn't market value, and City's, because obviously the argument is that it isn't. City are a great example because everything that is held against them in terms of the sort of general consensus is that it's all ludicrous and none of it makes any sense, because City don't have that kind of pulling power, whereas United do have that kind of pulling power. So whatever number you're plucking out of thin air, even if it is exorbitant on, let's say, Barcelona's pro-rated agreement on the Nou Camp, there'd still be some kind of logical explanation there. I'm saying within reason.
You could justify it.
Even if you're pushing the envelope, you're pushing it really high above what would seem reasonable, because that's how these things move. That's how the needle moves with that sort of thing. I think like Old Trafford would always be Old Trafford regardless of what name. And I think Adam's piece effectively said that it would be a front of name sponsor, so it would be like Emirates Old Trafford or something like that. So it'd be an introductory sponsor name. So it'd always be known as Old Trafford. So I don't think you'll ever move away from that. Am I that precious about it? Am I really that precious about it that I would think it matters that much to me when I know what it is anyway? At this point in time, do I feel like it's sacrosanct? I'm not sure, to be honest, Ed. I'm not sure it does mean that much to me. A new stadium as well, I can see why they would do it, and everyone's doing it. It's part of a trend. It's not, and again, you're not kind of besmirching any history at that point. You're kind of going hand in glove to make that happen, so I can understand that. It's not something I would want necessarily. It's not something I would sort of champion. But if it happens, I'm not necessarily saying that it's besmirching the tradition of the club or anything like that. I just think it's part of moving with the times. I don't know, really. I'd have to sort of... It depends on the numbers, obviously. If it's of material impact that it really does help us move along. If it's a way of circumventing all the regulations that Ratcliffe seems to be frustrated about, that gives us a leg up in getting in front of this, the acceleration of the turnover, which he's talking about, to get to where we need to be quicker, then I don't think that's a bad thing. United are a normal football club. I know you were going to come in there, but United are a normal football club, even with their massive reach and their potential massive revenue. So they still have to operate within the confines of what's normal. Unfortunately, these days, what's normal is selling sponsorship to every arm and leg of the club, and part of that is now the stadium. So,
I mean, obviously, the Carrington was sponsored a few years back, so I think it's the Aon training. I can't even remember. Right?
Exactly. But you're calling it Carrington. That's the point. Yeah,
I am, and so from a fan's perspective, of course, we'd always call it Old Trafford. That is why the level of sponsorship for stadium naming rights for existing stadiums is not that big.
Yeah.
And it's and the market is not as like massively inflated as people might think it is. Spurs, being in the new stadium 2 years, still have not found a sponsor. Right? Neither has the Olympic Stadium, West Ham London Stadium, whatever it's called. And other sponsorships for named, like the Emirates was a massive long-term deal, also bundled in with frontier on its own, not that valuable. So that's the, like, is it worth it for the amount of money it would drive? I mean, you know, I think I call myself on my Twitter handle a legacy fan. So I think there's a little instinctive thing that says, oh God, you know, it doesn't feel great to sell a key part of the United infrastructure like that, you know, given how much it would be. And it wouldn't be much, really. But if it's something that contributes to the cost of a refurb, or I think more likely a partial cost of building the stadium out, then okay, I guess so. You know, we move with the times. It's better than ticket price rises, that's for sure. The other thing to consider with this is because, like, having multiple naming rights partners in a row is hard to sell. They are typically very long-term deals.
Yeah.
Typically, you know, 10 or 20 years or something like that. So the name can start embedding in, and you get some value from the kind of repetition factor, rather than front of shirt where you change it every 2 or 3 years or whatever it is. And that's the thing that's all over the pictures. It's there's just much less value.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why the question comes up: can United drive enough revenue to make this thing worthwhile? Anyway, it's kind of interesting debate. I mean, clearly they've come into the club, new new partial owners and seen some things they don't like. I mean, Ratcliffe said it in his Bloomberg interview. He said there were some nasty surprises.
Yeah.
So he probably checked out the media department and was like, "Who the fuck is this guy Barton?" So and where's my book? Maybe you should do a book on him. There you go, butter him up a little bit.
Well,
so,
no, if he's bothered about books, I mean, I am good friends with Paddy Barclay, who did the interview with him for the book that the INEOS did. So,
yeah.
I mean, hopefully that
that's right.
Nice things have been said about me. I can't imagine that he'd be that peed off with me. I'm harmless.
No.
And Jim, if you're listening, I like you. I'm not saying anything bad about your decision to or not sponsor Old Trafford. I think it's an interesting debate, actually. I mean, there are things like the Cardiff owner changed the colour of the shirts. The Hull City owner was going to change the name of the team. There are things that
Tigers or something.
There are things that are unpalatable, and I know to a lot of people, and people might watch this or listen to it and say, and come at me and like think that I'm abandoning what my reputation would be as someone who's written a lot of books on United's history, that I don't really understand it. I do. I just think that we're part of a different era where these kind of things are in almost an inevitability, where you've got to, the more that you delay it, like United, like joining social media and stuff like that, it was a long time before they sort of got official platforms on Twitter and Facebook, and that only sort of coincided with Fergie retiring. You have to embrace what's happening. You don't necessarily have to have your stadium sponsored, but in terms of, I mean, like you're saying there, it might be a negligible cost of, well, it sounds ridiculous, like £300 million, but it's still a sizable, it's one or two summer transfer spend, which, again, I guess that makes it sound negligible as well, but it's still a massive amount of money.
Well, it's all competitive, isn't it? And United competing with not only clubs, two state-funded clubs in the Premier League and ambitious owners at Aston Villa and at Chelsea of different types, and the growth of Arsenal and Liverpool's sort of legacy pull in the world, and then Madrid and Barcelona and Juve and Milan and Bayern Munich and so on and so on and so on. So it's hyper competitive football. That's why no one actually makes any money. And why ticket price rises, if they happen, although they'd be deeply unpopular, are not about Ratcliffe extracting money. I've seen this already on social media. People just don't get it. But it's not about Ratcliffe extracting profit for himself. It's about how do you get the club back to a competitive place, given that revenues have stagnated for quite a long time. And it's the easiest thing to do. It's not a big gain. But it's much easier than going off and selling new sponsorships or getting a new fronter shirt that's even bigger than the one we've got, or so on and so on and so on. So, once Ratcliffe is fully in, which will be in the next 18 months to 3 years, I suspect, and once plans for Old Trafford's redevelopment or total reconstruction are announced, and we're a bit clearer about what the financing looks like, then we'll work out whether naming rights will happen and whether it's marginal or something significant. All right. That's the story of the day. We will be back maybe tomorrow, Friday, I think, with whatever new controversy there is surrounding United, because there's always something, isn't there? Thank you very much for listening.